Good evening and welcome to Aro Ling Cardiff. The teaching this evening will be given by Ngakma Nor'dzin, and the teaching is on the subject of the Yidam.
Now, many of you may have heard the Buddhism that we teach and we practice referred to as Tibetan Buddhism. And this is not really a very useful term because it is not only the Buddhism of Tibet, it is also the Buddhism of an area of northern India called Pemaka, and particularly the Buddhism of Bhutan. And the Bhutanese certainly do not call what they practice Tibetan Buddhism. It's their own Buddhism. They don't regard it as belonging to another country. So it's perhaps a good idea to drop this term, Tibetan Buddhism. And what the Bhutanese call Buddhism in their country is Vajrayana. And I think that when Ngakpa was talking about the vehicles, Sutrayana and Vajrayana were mentioned, but I'm just going to mention them again and explain what they mean, because Vajrayana is a term that we certainly use a lot in our tradition, whereas it is not a term you are going to have heard very much if you're used to, for instance, practicing with the Gelug tradition. So there are the two approaches to practice, and that is Sutrayana and Vajrayana. And Sutrayana, from the perspective of the Ngakma school, will embrace all the three vehicles, Pratyeka Buddhayana, Shrivaka Buddhayana, and Bodhisattva Buddhayana. And then Vajrayana will embrace the 6 tantras, of which Ati Yoga, the 6th tantra, as we have already understood, exists as a path in its own right, and it is then called Dzogchen. So the path, the Buddhism of Vajrayana embraces all the tantric teachings and the Dzogchen teachings. And this is certainly the basis of the Aro lineage. There isn't really any Sutrayana teaching in the Aro lineage, and where it is referred to, it is presented from the perspective of Vajrayana. Whereas if you are practicing in a school such as the Gelug school, I mention the Gelug school because it's the only other school that I have any experience of practicing in, but the Gelug school would approach Tantra. They wouldn't use the term Vajrayana, they might use Anuttara Yoga Tantra, for example, but they would approach it in the language of Sutrayana because their approach is based in the sutras. So our approach is based in the tantras and in Dzogchen, so we talk about Vajrayana. Now Sutrayana, as we have heard in the teaching on the vehicles, has an experientially common base. Everybody can be at the base of this method of practice. And the practices can be embraced without any special requirements other than learning them. And they can be approached with using the intellect and understood using the intellect. It is fundamentally the path of renunciation and understanding that it is grasping at the things we want, trying to get rid of the things we don't want, and ignoring the rest. That is our problem. And so we renounce the objects that create these problems to enable us to let go of those three tendencies. So the ultimate expression is monasticism, where you don't own anything, what you're eating is prescribed by the monastery, what you wear is monastic clothes, and that is all, and so on and so forth. Now in Vajrayana, the base is more subtle. The base is not approachable, or it isn't possible to gain the base through the intellect. So the base of the Tantras is emptiness, and the base of Dzogchen is the experience of the non-duality of emptiness and form. And it isn't possible to embrace these practices without having some experience of that. I will come back to that later. But because these practices cannot be grasped by the intellect, it isn't that the intellect is no longer a useful tool, it's just that it cannot be expected that realization can arise via the use of intellect. And because of this, the path that the Tantras and Dzogchen present have this quality of non-intellectual matter, non-intellectual content, not being able to really quite understand it. And the method, the symbolic method, is not entirely graspable by the intellect. Now, the path of Vajrayana or the path of Tantra, is union with the mind of the Lama. And the Yidam is the symbolic method of achieving union with the mind of the Lama. So we do not use our own teacher as the base of practice. We use the Yidam or the awareness being. In many of the original books, they were called deities, which is a bit of a confusing way to refer to them because it suggests that they're gods and goddesses, which they're not. They are visionary beings, the beings of light and sound that exist at the energetic level of being. They are an empty form. So there's an ambiguity and a confusion built into the method that it cannot be grasped by the intellect. Now, as soon as one is introduced to the method of practice of the Yidam, I think it might be worth saying, first of all, it is this imagery that attracts some people to Vajrayana practice. For some people, it is that imagery, so rich and colourful, and these amazing beings in extraordinary postures and colours and wrathful faces, peaceful faces, holding strange things, dancing on corpses and so on and so forth. This is very attractive to some people. And if it is attractive, then that is useful of itself, because you can be empty in relationship to your interest in that imagery. But if that imagery doesn't attract you, then actually the tantric imagery can be off-putting to some people. Certainly I have come across people who really don't like all this. It's a bit too noisy, a bit too colourful, a bit, what the heck's going on here? All these colours in this room and all these images. And it was interesting. I think it might have been one of the grandchildren. We were showing them the shrine room one day. And I suddenly realised this room is full of naked women. And that in itself is quite unusual for most people, to enter a room and there's all these partially dressed or completely naked women in here. That is not part of Christian imagery, really. And so that is immediately sort of a bit in your face if that's not what you're used to. But as soon as one is introduced to practices that involve an awareness being, a visionary being, a Yidam. I'll use the word Yidam because it's succinct and that is the Tibetan word for them. Perhaps questions arise. Does the Yidam actually exist? Or is it just something that is imagined or visualized as a method? Or do the Yidams actually exist from their side? If they do exist, where do they exist? I don't see them when I'm walking down the street. I haven't seen them in my dreams, certainly not until I came across other images of them. They didn't seem to spontaneously appear to me. So if they exist, where do they exist? How do they exist? If they exist, what is it about them that enables them to transform my experience of it for myself? What is it about them that enables me to become a different person, to awaken as a realized being? The practice is to unify with the Yidam. How can I engage in a practice of unifying with something if I'm not really sure whether I believe it exists or not, or don't really have any experience of it existing? How is that possible? How can I use such a tool if I don't really understand it or know it? Well, I think it's quite useful to look at some examples in our ordinary life where we're doing this all the time. I have in front of me a computer. I don't know how that computer works. I've got a light shining on us so that you can see our faces. It's run on electricity. I plug it in, it works. I have no idea how that works. I have some vague understanding of currents and watts and things like that back from school days, but I really don't understand it. Aeroplanes, these huge, incredibly heavy lumps of metal, get up into the sky and stay up there, and I don't die when I get on one. How is that possible, that that lump of metal can be up there in the sky and get me from here to Kathmandu or wherever? When I follow a recipe for a cake, I put all those things together and it's a wet thing. But when I take it out of the oven, it's a dry, spongy thing that's doubled or trebled in size and tastes quite different to how the wet stuff tasted. That's a mystery to me. But I can follow the method. I can engage in using those things, and somehow something works. It does what it's supposed to do. And it's exactly the same with the Yidam, that we can follow the method of engaging with the practice of the Yidam without needing all the answers. I think this is very much an important aspect of the emptiness, the empty base of Vajrayana, is that letting go of needing to know is of itself an empty base. So we engage in the practice from the perspective of allowing ourselves not to know. We just have confidence in whoever is presenting the path to us, and that confidence has to be built up. It would be naive and foolish to just accept it because somebody tells you this will work. It's important to build a relationship with the teacher who's giving you the teachings. But once you have built that relationship, once you have seen that the method is clearly working for them, and you want to follow the method and be able to change in the ways you see other people engaged in the method changing, then you are able to be empty in relation to the method and simply embrace it. So there's a phrase that Rinpoche uses in the context of Vajrayana practice, Yidam practice, and that is wearing the body of visions. And I want to explore that phrase a little bit. So if I'm going to do some cooking, I might put on an apron. I usually tie my hair back, and I will wash my hands. If I'm a scientist, perhaps I put on a white coat, and perhaps there are certain cleanliness procedures that I have to follow in order to enter the dimension, the mandala of the scientist. I know when Ngakpa worked at the wafer fab where they made the silicon wafers for computers, anyone working in the clean room there had to adopt this head to toe, you used to call them bunny suits, didn't you, or something like that?
Yeah.
Because just simply being a human being was enough to contaminate the product. So the product had to be protected from the scientist working on it. If I'm going horse riding, I'm going to wear an appropriate pair of breeches, probably with 2 or 3 extra layers of fabric on the seat. I'm going to wear long boots or chaps to protect me from the stirrup leathers. I'm going to wear gloves because you'll be using, holding the reins, and I'll wear a protective hat. If I'm working in a factory or doing a dirty DIY job or something like that, I'm going to wear overalls to protect my clothing and to keep them clean. Some jobs demand a uniform. Going to school, you wear a uniform. Police officers wear a uniform. Nurses wear a uniform. Doctors used to wear white coats, but it seems that they don't anymore. However, they do have a uniform, and that is a stethoscope around their neck. If you're going out for a meal, you won't wear your overalls or your uniform or your riding breeches. You'll wear suitably posh clothing for the quality of restaurant that you are visiting. So we're all used to wearing appropriate clothing and adopting a physical quality of being that is appropriate for a given situation. And there are also the implements of those situations. So I have my mixing bowl, my food processor, my wooden spoon if I'm going to do some cooking. If I'm doing some scientific work, I might have these cute little things, test tubes and things like that, and who knows what. I'm not a scientist. If I'm going riding, I might carry a horse whip. I may have some sugar lumps in my pocket, or some pony nuts to give the horse a treat so that he'll like me. If I'm working in a garage or doing some DIY, I might have a screwdriver or a spanner, or all sorts of equipment. If I'm a police officer, I'm probably going to have a walkie-talkie, a truncheon tucked in there somewhere. Who knows what else they carry these days. And if I'm going out to a fancy restaurant, I'm going to have my clutch bag and my lipstick in there, and probably a tissue. If it's me, I've always got a tissue somewhere. So we have the implements that are appropriate for however we are arising in a given situation. So there's that energetic quality of our demeanor that we change to fit in with the situation. And we are flexible between these situations. So when I am being teacher, then I adopt a teacher demeanor. I wear the clothes of the teacher. I wear the earrings of the teacher. I play the instruments of the teacher. But it would be a bit foolish and perhaps slightly comical to go and do my shopping playing my chudram and bell and wearing my robes and expecting everybody to treat me like a teacher. It would also be inappropriate when I'm with our children and our grandchildren to try and be the teacher and be teaching them. If I'm Mamgi, I'm much more likely to be sitting on the floor playing with Lego. If you're the boss, then you adopt the demeanor of a boss. But you don't do that when you get home to your partner, because you're not the boss of your partner and they might not be able to appreciate you treating them as if you were their underling. When I'm a daughter, I don't behave like a mother. When I'm a mother, I don't behave like a child. You could be childish and playful, but you don't give up the responsibility of being the adult with the child. So who we are is not fixed. And if we try and fix who and what we are, we get into problems because we try to take those fixations with us into a situation, and then that's going to cause us problems. So adopting the demeanor, the clothing, and the implements of various manifestations of ourselves is not in fact alien to us. It is in fact completely familiar. So Vajrayana skillfully embraces this wearing, changing the manner in which we are, and offers us an empty form to adopt. So we adopt the form of the Yidam, we adopt the implements of the Yidam, we adopt the energetic qualities of the Yidam, and then we can be the Yidam. And the Yidam is the nature of the mind of the Lama, the mind of the realized Lama. So when we are able to wear the body of visions of the Yidam, we are being the Lama. We are being the realized teacher. Whether you regard that Lama as an actual human being or the Lama as Guru Rinpoche and Yeshid Sogyal, who are semi-mythical, they were human beings, but they are beyond human beings now, or Shakyamuni Buddha or whatever. But when we are engaged in unifying with the Yidam, then we are the qualities of those beings. Now, there are 3 types of Yidam that we can recognize: peaceful, joyous, and wrathful Yidams. They are usually referred to in this way. And I think it's also quite interesting to think about which of these attracts you as well. Because I had a conversation with Ngakma Rinpoche a little while ago, and he was always, right from the beginning, very attracted to the energetic, wrathful beings, the ones that were riding things and standing in these powerful stances and wielding weapons and so on and so forth. Whereas for me, the Yidams that I was most drawn to initially were the very peaceful Yidams, because at that time my life wasn't peaceful and I certainly didn't feel peaceful. And I was very attracted to the potential of becoming serene. I'm still quite attracted to the potential of becoming serene. I don't think I've made it yet, but that was what brought me to an interest in the Yidam. I think probably because I felt as though I was a bit of an angry person. And at that time, I didn't understand how embracing a being that looked angry could make you less angry. It felt like I was just going to be laying more of the same stuff on. So I was attracted to the peaceful Yidams. Oh, they look so amazing. They sit there with these wonderfully shiny, benevolent faces, and they have this beautiful smile, and they radiate light, and they're playing a bell. And yes, that was what attracted me. But then as one learns more and understands more, one can understand the qualities of other Yidams. So the joyous Yidams are dancing. I don't think there were too many images of joyous Yidams when we first were involved. It was mainly either peaceful or wrathful. So I think knowing that there were these joyous Yidams came a little bit later in my life as a practitioner. But they're often wearing beads of flowers or crystal or pearl, and they're dancing, and they have this radiant, energetic quality as well. And then you have the wrathful Yidams who have this powerful stance about them. They might be riding a tiger or a snow lion or some incredible creature. And I think something that put me off these images initially was a lot of them are conventionally ugly, or at least to me they looked ugly, because they have these snarls and their eyes are vicious, and they have this extraordinary powerful quality about them. And because I didn't really have a sense of myself being beautiful, I didn't want to arise as something that to me looked ugly. So these are many of the misconceptions that can arise around engaging with Yidam practice. That why would I want to look like that? They're ugly. But that is a misunderstanding of the nature of the Yidam. So in order to engage in the practice of the Yidam, we have to be introduced. Now, this is an interesting aspect of Yidam practice that puts me very much in mind of Jane Austen books. We were watching a film of one of Jane Austen's books the other day, Northanger Abbey. And the heroine and her aunt, who the heroine is staying with, heroines often seem to be staying with aunts in Jane Austen books. And she was staying with her aunt, and they were in the Bath assembly rooms, but they didn't know anybody there. And because they didn't know anybody, they couldn't talk to anybody, because the rule at that time was that you couldn't just go up to anybody and talk to them. You had to be introduced. But because the room was very busy, lots of bustling people, they accidentally bump into a young man. Obviously, he's the person that she falls in love with. But anyway, they accidentally bump into him, and they speak to him as one naturally would. And then it's all very, but we haven't been introduced, and all this, that, and the other. So then he goes off and he finds the master of ceremonies. And the master of ceremonies introduces them to each other, even though they've already spoken to each other. And after this, then he can introduce them to other people, and then they become part of Bath society. So it's a very formal arrangement that I think is rather charming, because there's such a politeness there. And there is this quality of politeness and respect and being in awe of the Yidam and recognizing that the Yidam is something that is slightly beyond us unless we've been introduced is a useful approach. In order to engage in the practice of the Yidam, we need to have the DNA of the Yidam, if you like. We need to have some means of knowing the Yidam. And this means of knowing them is receiving their description, what color they are. They could be any of the 5 colors, yellow, white, red, green, or blue, or black. Black is quite common, or maroon. They could have flaming hair. They could be wearing ornaments of pearl, crystal, flowers, or bone, or metal. They could be dancing, seated, riding, holding Vajra weapons, or holding a bow and arrow, a katvanga, a skull bowl, a flaying knife, all sorts of things they could be holding. So first of all, you need to be able to see the Yidam, to know what the Yidam looks like. And then you need to know the sound of the Yidam. And the sound of the Yidam is the mantra. And the mantra is like the most extraordinary and intimate introduction you could ever receive. Being given the mantra of the Yidam is the key to then being able to engage in the practice of the Yidam and understand the qualities of the Yidam. Now, if we look at somebody, let's take as an example the Queen. We know what the Queen looks like. We see her on stamps, if nothing else. She's in quite a lot of the papers at the moment because of 70 years on the throne. We've been watching a series called The Crown, so there's a sense of knowing her a little bit better through somebody's interpretation of what she's like there. But it isn't realistic to say that we know the Queen, because we have not been introduced and we haven't met the Queen in person. So how can you know somebody and even start to have an inkling of what somebody is like unless you've been introduced and unless you've actually met them in person and received some knowledge of them that enables you to then build on that knowledge by continued reintroduction, by continually renewing the relationship with the Yidam. Now, in terms of Vajrayana, there isn't a royal tea party that we can be invited to where we meet the Queen. And that wouldn't actually be very helpful anyway, because all you do would be stand in a line, shake her hand, sit and have your tea, and she's somewhere way in the distance. I was once at a luncheon in the presence of the Queen, and she was about 4 or 5 tables away from me. I certainly couldn't say that I met the Queen, even though I was in the same room as her. So how do we meet the Yidam? We meet the Yidam through the Lama. Through the Lama with whom we do have a personal relationship. And through the Lama who knows the Yidam personally, who knows the Yidam intimately through their own practice. So the Lama provides the means of being introduced to the Yidam, teaching you how to learn what the Yidam is like, how to engage in the practice of being the Yidam, gives you the key, the DNA of the Yidam in the form of the envisionment, in the form of the mantra, so that you can engage in that practice, so that then you do know the Yidam. You can become unified with the Yidam, and thereby unified with the mind of the Lama through that symbolic practice. Now, one of the reasons for using the Yidam rather than the actual Lama, the actual human Lama, is that because we are creatures of patterning, creatures of distraction, prejudice, that we like everything to fit in with our view of reality, and our view of reality is skewed and imperfect, that if there is the danger, if we engage in the practice with the image of our actual Lama, that we will allow their human qualities or our experience of their human qualities to get in the way of experiencing them as a visionary being, experiencing them as a realized being. So we use the visionary being, the Yidam, as a way to approach them that doesn't have the attachment of habitual patterning that we lay on human beings. We can't lay that habitual patterning on the Yidam because the Yidam is so completely different to our experience of ordinary human beings. So the Yidam is a form of pure energy, pure form, pure empty form, that doesn't have all those qualities of attraction and aversion and indifference that we lay on the ordinary world. So next week, I'm going to talk about how the Lama introduces us to the Yidam. I'm going to talk about the process that happens there so that we can learn to get to know the Yidam.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I particularly enjoyed the everyday not knowings, the things that we can use because we know the method, but we really don't understand how it works, and the everyday symbolisms as well that are always there. So this is not that alien.
Yeah, I think it can be a problem that it feels very alien, and it's good to see that we're playing with symbol all the time.